IB Nation. Welcome back to the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It is 5 o'clock at night, Trevor. So you know what that means. That means it's not the big show. That means it is IB Nation Sports Talk. I'm Brian Driscoll. I am not Sean Stiers. He's way better looking than I am. That's Trevor Trowbridge. He's better looking than Vince or Jesse, with all due respect. We're here filling in for Sean because Sean right now is prepping his mic and getting himself ready to go for the season opener for the women's basketball team. As you all know, Sean is the voice of the Notre Dame Fighting Irish basketball team for the ladies. And so they kick off the season tonight, I believe, against Mercyhurst, correct? So it's our first chance to officially see what a backcourt of Olivia Miles and Hannah Hidalgo and Sonia Citron will look like, because we saw two of those three in the scrimmage, and it was fun to watch. But Sonia Citron did not play. I believe she's going to be playing tonight, so we will get a chance to see that. But we got a fun show for you all tonight. We're going to talk about a few different topics, Trevor, and we're going to actually add one to the show based on what we talked about before. We're obviously going to talk about Marcus Freeman's press conference today, and he had a lot of interesting things to say today. Talked a lot about Florida State, his team getting healthier. Of course, the college football playoff comes out tomorrow, so we're going to have some fun kind of previewing that, talk about where we think things are going to go. It's going to be wild, Trevor. This past weekend really shook some things up. We'll dive into all that. And then part 3, we're going to do a little rapid fire. I'm going to be asking the questions. Trevor's going to be answering them. So we're going to have a little bit of fun with that here as we get ready to kick off IB Nation Sports Talk. But Trevor, as we do, we have a new friend of the program that we'd like to give a little bit of a shout out to here as we get going, because it is that time of the year where games start mattering a little bit more in college football. The NFL is getting close to that midway point. The crazy thing about Tuesday, Trevor, it is obviously the day that the first college football playoff rankings come out, right? So that's big. It's kind of another big deal. The presidential election is that day. A lot of state House representatives, state representatives in Indiana. We've got to choose whether or not to keep certain judges on the ballot. I will be voting to keep them on the ballot, by the way, because of why people are trying to get them off of there. It's so much stuff to go over and vote on tomorrow. That's a big deal. Obviously, everybody knows about the national elections, but there's obviously a lot of very important local elections and amendments and all types of things. And it's the trade deadline in the NFL. So a lot going on, man, a lot going on. And that's gonna shake up somehow, maybe how some people start making some little decisions in the betting game here as we get into the second half of the NFL season, as we get closer and closer and closer to the college football playoff.
This is a big week, Brian. I think you said it perfectly. And it starts tonight. Tonight, Monday Night Football. We all know what goes on. Chiefs take on the Buccaneers, and there's no better way to follow the game than if you check out MyBookie. So what you guys need to go do is go to MyBookie, create an account. If you have one already, fantastic. But if you use promo code Irish, what they're going to do is double your deposit with a deposit bonus. As of right now, the Chiefs are 9-point favorites over the injury-riddled Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I believe that they are without Mike Evans again. And unfortunately, Chris Godwin has been lost for the season. So don't forget about the MyBookie risk-free Thursdays either, which is something that I took advantage of last week. This week on Thursday Night Football, Bengals take on the Ravens. And last time, if you guys remember, that game went into overtime. I was actually there. Unfortunately, the Bengals did not come out on top, so my wife and her family were a little bit more upset than I was. Call me a fair weather fan, but still, hooday nonetheless, right? But they take on the Ravens in Baltimore this week. Right now, the Ravens are 6-point favorites. Also, make sure you enroll in their loyalty rewards program because it rewards you for every time you place a bet. But be sure to check out MyBookie. It's a sports book that gives you control and rewards you for every moment of play.
And if you took the if you took the Ravens on Sunday against the Broncos, you would have, I'm sure, covered that, because I assume that the spread was way lower than what the final score ended up being. So just a reminder of why the Broncos suck. Real quick, the ladies are out to a real quick 18-8 start. Looks like Sonia Citron has not played yet, so maybe they're holding her out in this game. But so far, Notre Dame's only missed one shot. They're 8 of 9 so far. 9 of 10 so far to start the game. So they're starting off pretty hot here, Trev. So
Decent.
first thing that I want to talk about, Trevor, is obviously a little bit of news came out today from the Texas side of things, and that is going to be, and this has not been confirmed by Notre Dame, but I have talked to enough people to believe that this is going to happen, that Notre Dame is going to schedule Texas for a home and home in 2008 and 2009, which is going to make the schedules in those seasons insane. So, Trevor, first we'll talk about just the Texas Notre Dame angle of this. I'll be honest with you. I've always kind of felt like there's a decade should not go by where Notre Dame and Texas don't play at least one home and home, in my opinion. I mean, you're talking about two blue bloods. They've only played each other 12 times. Notre Dame has a 9-3 all-time series lead over Texas. Obviously, Texas won the most recent one, which was in 2016. They won in overtime. Notre Dame won the 5 previous games. Texas won in 1970 and 1934. First game was played in 1913. Actually, Trevor, they played in 13, 15, and then 34, then 52 and 54. Notre Dame won 4 of those, lost the 1 in 34. Then Texas won in 1970 in the Cotton Bowl, beat Notre Dame by 4. The Irish won the Cotton Bowl the next year, 24-11. Played again in 1978, the year I was born. This is a couple months before I was born, but beat Texas in the Cotton Bowl 38-10. And that win in the Cotton Bowl actually vaulted Notre Dame up into the net championship. That's how Dan Devine won his championship that season, Trevor. I believe Notre Dame, if I remember correctly, I believe Notre Dame was 5th going into the bowl game, I believe. Yes, they were 5th at 9-1. And they beat Texas, who was number 1 and undefeated. Texas was the only undefeated team in the country. Oklahoma was at 2. Alabama was at 3 at 10-1. Michigan was 4th at 10-1, and Notre Dame was sitting there at 9-1. And Notre Dame absolutely blasted Texas that game 38-10, and that vaulted Notre Dame all the way up into the national championship. I would assume there was a little bit of controversy about that back then, but that is one of Notre Dame's national championships that they can claim during that time. So, looking at that, Trev, that was always a fun season to talk about because Alabama was ranked ahead of Notre Dame. There were some common opponents. Alabama played USC that year, beat them 21-20. Notre Dame beat USC that year 49-19. So a little bit more convincing. We might be doing a lot of that here this year as well, Trevor. But and obviously Notre Dame won that title, won again in 1988. But the teams didn't play again until 1995 and 1996. They had a home and home. At the end of the Lou Holtz era, Notre Dame won both games, won 55-27 at home, then 27-24 on the road. I believe it was that was the year that Jim Sanson kicked a game-winning field goal for the Irish. In that game, they didn't play again until 2015. Y'all remember that game? Notre Dame absolutely blasted Texas to start the 2015 season. And then a year later, the Longhorns got revenge with a 50-47 overtime win. It was a great game. We would later find out they both stunk. Big picture, but that game was at least fun to watch, and they have not played since then. So it's not out of the realm of possibility they will play again between now and 2028 because of the college football playoff, but for now, the next game is scheduled for 2028. So first of all, Trevor, just want to kind of talk briefly about your opinion about Notre Dame and Texas playing each other and whether you agree with me that at least once a decade. I'd be even okay if there was like, every 5 years you have a home and home, then 5 years home and home, that kind of thing. Be curious to get your thoughts about scheduling this type of game for the Irish.
I'm with you, man. I love when traditional old school college programs play each other, especially ones that don't get to play that often, right? Because unless you go out of your way, unless the athletic directors and the schools and the programs go out of their way to schedule these home and home series, you're kind of just vying for a postseason game, right? Which, to your point, Bryan, might happen very soon. Could happen this year, right? Who knows? But I love when Notre Dame goes and plays historically rich programs, right? That's always fun for me. The games mean more. And you guys know the slogan, right? Those are the games why you come to Notre Dame. There's a good chance those will be night games. Yeah, you go to Notre Dame to play Texas at night, at home, and away, right? So for me, I love it. And it honestly, it kind of comes at a funny time because last week you and I talked about the benefits of Notre Dame playing down in Texas for a recruiting purpose. So kind of funny that comes out about the, couple days after you and I had that discussion. But I think it's fantastic. I love when any two blue-blooded programs meet up and play each other. It's going to be a lot of fun. 2028 sounds far away. It's not as far away as what some people think. It'll be here before we know it. And Bryan and I will be cranking out some content around keys to victory and key matchups and all that fun stuff. But until then, I'm excited. I'm glad that they put them on the schedule.
It is interesting, Trevor, to talk about those games because we don't know what Texas's schedule is going to look like that year. We have a much better idea of what Notre Dame's schedule is going to look like. But the interesting thing, Trevor, when you look at Notre Dame's schedule in 2028, if you just look at teams of the conferences that they're currently in now, Notre Dame now has two SEC teams scheduled in both 28 and 29. The 28 schedule, and this is you're adding Texas to this, they already play. Now, keep in mind also what's interesting is Notre Dame and USC are not scheduled beyond, I believe, 2026. So very curious to see if this has any impact on that. But Notre Dame in 2028, their ACC schedule for that 2 years at Virginia Tech, home against Clemson. That'll be at Virginia Tech is already scheduled for November 4th. And then home against Clemson is already scheduled for November 11th. Notre Dame also plays Boston College at home, Miami at home, at Pitt. Of course, they have Navy that game. And as of right now, that game is slated to be played in Annapolis, but I don't know if that's actually accurate. That's what Football Schedules has. And then Notre Dame also plays at Purdue September 23rd. And then on September 16th, they play Arkansas. So now you add Texas to that mix. 2029, Trevor, is going to be the interesting one.
Yeah.
September 1st, Notre Dame plays Alabama. On November 10th, Notre Dame plays at Florida State. They also play at NC State, at Syracuse, home against Georgia Tech, home against Wake Forest, home against Navy, at USF, and now they play Texas. Now, I don't know which one's going to be home, which one's going to be away. I would imagine that, it's going to be difficult no matter which way you spend it, Trev. But that is the one interesting thing. You could sit here and talk about how, oh, man, that's going to be a brutal schedule. We don't have any clue what these teams are going to be like in 28, 29. Because if 2-3 years ago I'd have told you, 2 years ago I'd have told you, man, that Notre Dame schedule in 2024, oh, boy, they got Florida State coming to town on November 9th. Heck, if I'd have told you that 2 months ago, you'd have been like, that's going to be a big one. We really don't have these teams are going to be. But kudos to Notre Dame for continuing to try to schedule these types of games. And you know what? Kudos to Texas for being willing to schedule a team like Notre Dame, because they could easily just pull a Lincoln Riley and be like, hey, we're in a good, quote-unquote, good conference now, so let's be punks and schedule nothing but trash in our non-conference. But that's not what Texas does, Trev. And if you really look at what they've kind of got coming down the pike, they've got Michigan in 2027, which they just played Michigan this year. They play Oklahoma and Ohio State Oklahoma's they play them every year. But they play Ohio State in 25 and 26. They have a home against Ohio State in 25 and 26. Their 2025 schedule. We talked about how tough Notre Dame's schedule is this year. This is Texas' schedule next year. At Ohio State, they get San Jose State, UTEP, and Sam Houston at home. They play Oklahoma and Dallas. They play at Florida, at Georgia, at Kentucky, at Mississippi State, home against Arkansas, home against A&M, home against Vanderbilt. So respect to those teams that are willing to play that kind of schedule, to be honest with you. So, but for Notre Dame, obviously, this is an important. It's important to schedule these types of games. I just kind of, I don't know if I want to be playing Alabama and Texas, and I think it's who was the other one Notre Dame had in 2029? There was like 3 crazy games, and if you
Florida State, I think.
Yes, at Florida State. They'll also play Texas. They'll also play Alabama and potentially still USC. That's going to be yeah.
Man, that's that'll be a gauntlet, one that's going to be fun for us to talk about down the road here, man. But let's just hope that the draw, whatever it is that I mean, maybe Notre Dame lucks out and they play both at home, especially traveling to Florida State, but not going to hold my breath because, like you said, either way, it's going to be a going to be a tough matchup. But we don't know what those teams are going to look like then, right? We also don't know what Notre Dame is going to look like at that point in time, right? I mean, Notre Dame could be, with the recruiting pipeline the way that it's continuing to build up, who knows, right?
Well,
I mean, it could
just
be.
Think about this, Trevor. Talk about how far down the road it is. 2028, the first year that they might play, will be Noah Grubbs, who's currently a junior in high school. It'll be his junior year of college.
Gosh.
Like Notre Dame's current sophomore class would have to be sixth-year seniors in 2028. So, like, they're gone. So, I mean, it is down the road. We don't know what these teams are going to be. We don't know who their coaches are going to be. We don't know who their players are going to be. But I do love the fact that that two blue bloods, like you mentioned it, Trevor, two blue bloods playing each other. That's how it's supposed to be. That's how it's supposed to be.
Mm-hmm. It's nice, man. And I was told on good faith that Notre Dame doesn't play anybody. So glad to see these guys on the schedule.
Because Jack Swarbrick totally dropped the ball on this year's schedule. He did. He should have absolutely been able to look into the future and be able to predict that USC was going to be, down. Yeah. He should have been able to predict that Florida State, coming off of an undefeated regular season, was going to be down. Totally on him for not being able to predict that. And totally on him for not being able to predict that.
When you have the money and the resources that Notre Dame does and the crystal ball that they have sitting there in the Goog, I mean, you got to know what's coming down the road, right? I mean, let's go.
Totally. Totally blame Jack Swarbrick. That's the go-to, right? When anything doesn't, this is all Jack Swarbrick's fault. Yes. So, by the way, end of the first quarter, Notre Dame's up 32-13. They went 14 of 18 shooting in the first.
Goodness gracious!
In the first half, 9 assisted shots in the first quarter of the game. So, yeah, it's a big one. So it's going to be interesting, Trevor. Those schedules are going to be a challenge. We're not going to spend too much time talking about a schedule 4 or 5 years from now. But I did think that was fast. I was like, don't they play Bama around that time? And then, of course, in 2030, I believe, is when the schedule against Florida starts. No, they play at Alabama in 2030. And then they play at Bama in 30 and home against Florida State in 30. 31 is when the Florida home and home starts. So, is that all? Yeah. So in 2031, they play at Clemson. They play home against Florida, home against Miami, at North Carolina, at Indiana, home against USF, home against NC State, home against Navy, at Pitt. So it's some very fascinating schedules coming down the road. So going to be very interesting to see how those play out, Trev.
Oh, yeah.